Hi, I'm DJ Ware. On this episode of the CyberGizmo, I'm going to be installing Wireguard on Linux right after this. So, I guess the place to talk about, VPNs and what they can do for you is to protect your privacy. To make this really work, I'm going to do this in a lab setting, but if I was doing this for real, my WireGuard server, it's a client server, so your server part you would want to put out on a hosting service like, Linode or maybe DigitalOcean or Amazon, something like that, where you would then have that server up and your VPN access would go from your home network through your ISP across the internet to the WireGuard server and then out onto the internet, looking as if you were coming from that server itself. So today what we're going to do is just kind of go through the steps in setting it up. I'll talk a little bit about some of the pitfalls that you can fall into, some of the traps that will keep it from working, and how to deal with those. So let's get started. So the first thing you'll want to do is make sure that you're up to date. I always like to do that because if you don't, you may run into some issues because maybe some of the packages have gotten stale, and you'll want to do that on both. That WGS is my server, WGC is my client. So there we go. All right, so we're all good there. Everything is fine. The next thing I want to do on just the server side, I don't want to do this on the client side. This is just for the server. If you want your packets to be able to, if I don't do anything else right now, my packets, when they come in from the client, will stop at the server. They won't go any further. So I need to set up routing or forwarding so that the machine on the server side will take the packets off of the WireGuard interface and place them back onto the regular network so that they can then flow out to the internet or wherever those are going to go. So in order to do that, I need to edit a file called syscontrol.config. And you'll notice where my cursor is blinking, because this is the last place where I edited, there is a line in here that allows you to forward IPv4 traffic, and it will be commented out. It'll have a pound sign in front of it by default. So just remove the pound sign. If you want to do forwarding on IPv6 traffic, the section below it has that. So if you want to turn that on, you can. And if you don't, then just leave it commented. The next thing you'll want to do is to do a syscontrol -p, which then reads the file and then puts the new entry out into the proc tables. Sometimes the networking won't pick this up until the system has been restarted, so you may need to reboot. But I would get my system up to date. I would do this, and then I would go ahead and do an install on WireGuard. And you'll need to do that on both sides. So obviously I have done it both on both sides. So the next thing you'll want to do here is you have to generate your public and the private and the public keys on both sides, on both the server side and the client side. So it doesn't matter which one you do first, but the command for that is wg gen key. This generates the private key. Now in my case, I don't want to write it out to a file. I'm going to write it to a T, which it takes it in two places, sort of like a fork. So the first fork, it writes out to the private key file, and the second fork continues across the pipe to the next application. So it's like making a copy of the file. So WG, and then we're going to do a pub key. Would help to spell it right. And that should generate 2 files. Now I am going to show you my private keys today, but in practice, you never want to do that. The only key you ever want to share with anyone else is your public key. So I need to come over here and do exactly the same thing. So I'm going to cheat. There we go. And there's my public key. So I'm not going to use those. I've already set mine up, and I don't want to reconfigure everything to have to make this work. So I've got my public and private keys established now. The next thing is to go and start configuring. So let's go to Etsy Wireguard. And before we go in here, we'll need some information. I need 2 pieces of information. The first thing I need to know is what is my hardware interface name for my network card, and it is ENS18. I also need to know what my IP address is. This is DHCP, which is not advisable. You do not want to use DHCP. You'll want to make this a manual IP, a static IP, before you run it. But for today, this is fine. For my purposes, this is fine. But for your purposes, to make this permanent, you do not want to use DHCP, obviously. And the reason for that will become clear when we start to look at the configuration file. So the next thing is bring up whatever editor you prefer. And WG0. So all the interfaces in WireGuard start with, by convention, WG. You can call them Frank or Hot Dog or whatever you want. It doesn't matter. But the interfaces by convention always start with WG and then have a number after it. Each interface is a unique endpoint. So these are point-to-point. Even though they're client-server, they're point-to-point. So that means that if you have 5 users that need WireGuard access, you have to create 5 interfaces, 1 for each user. So, and I don't know any other way around that. Maybe you guys do, but I don't. So, and there's some reasoning behind that, and that's because of the keys. I suppose, I don't know what would happen if you tried to share the key. I don't know. It would probably just become a disaster. But let's start with the interface. So the first thing you'll need in square braces is a declaration that says that everything below this is the interface, which is the WireGuard interface that we are going to create in our network. So the first thing is the address. This is the IP address of the WireGuard part of the interface. So this has nothing whatsoever to do with your LAN or your public IPs that you're using with your server. This is unique to the WireGuard. Hope that's clear. So you don't want to use a subnet that is in use. That would be bad. So you'll want to create a new subnet, and I'm going to use 10.200.1.27 as my host address, and then I'm going to make a subnet mask of 24. So that's what I'm going to use for today. Whatever you decide to use is up to you. Save config equals true means that normally if you go out to like the WireGuard site and go through their tutorials, they do all their commands on the command line. Since we're using a file, if I have save config equal true, I can make modifications to the file provided WireGuard is down, as you can't change this file. It'll overwrite it because of this with whatever configuration settings are in memory. So if I make a change to this and then I bring down WireGuard, it'll overwrite this. So yeah, you don't want it. Anyway, but if you use command line configuration to make changes, when you bring down the WireGuard interface, it will then write those new entries all out to the file for you. That's kind of a nice thing. Post up is my IP. In this case, I'm going to set my IP tables to allow this to forward traffic coming from the Wireguard interface onto my network, onto my regular network. And then the second part is I'm going to maintain NAT control for post routing, and I'm pointing it to my Ethernet hardware in order to maintain that NAT address, because a lot of times with IPv4 we use NATs. Post down is so the -A means to create it, the -D means to delete it. So basically I'm just housekeeping. If I bring up the system, I have my configuration is being created. And if I bring it down, I'm removing all of the things that I set in the IP tables, just keeping it clean. The next thing is the listen port, and this is by convention 51820. For each interface, obviously, you would need a unique listening port. So you probably would start with 820. And for WG1, you would probably make that 821. And for WG2, you'd probably make that 51822, so on, whatever you want to do here. This is the private key for my server. Now, it's different than what I just showed you, and we can look at that. Because I didn't overwrite these, I hope. Yeah, so, right. So Q org TWUV, and we can go back in here, Q org TWUV. Yep, so that's my private key. Now, there'll be some other things I need to do to this, but for right now, this is good enough to get started. So I can do a quick, and this is an up, and then I just put in WG0. It'll figure out that there's a configuration file it needs. Oops. Let's try WG. There we go. So now that's up. And then I can look at it, and you see it doesn't have the client side. So let's go over and look at what we need to do for the client. It'll just sit there. It's not going to go anywhere for a while. You have to remember one thing about UDP, though, is it's connectionless. So, yeah, and there's some things here that we'll want to do. But we'll talk about that as we go through this. Okay. Same thing as the server, have an interface, except the address this time is the address of the client. So I just reversed the 27 with 72. And same thing, save config. These two items get generated for you automatically, so you don't have to put those in. These will change based on, the first time you bring it up. So obviously this has been brought up before, and so it's generated those entries for me. The only other thing you need is the private key for the client side. So that is the private key that is generated for the client. And then you'll have to manually create the peer side, and that is describing the Wireguard host or the server. So the public key over here is actually the public key that is displayed right there for the host side. So you'll want that to be in there. Now, the allowed IPs, if you go out and you see some of the Wireguard videos in YouTube, a lot of them will recommend using 0.0.0.0/0 as the allowed IPs. That way all of your traffic goes through the VPN. However, the problem with that is that I have started an SSH session using my public IP address on the client host. And so the replies right now are coming back through the public side. Once I start this, I can send packets to the public side of the network, that my 192.168.1.117. But the problem is that it's going to try to send the reply back through the tunnel, through the Wireguard tunnel, which that ain't going to fly. It doesn't know what to do with that, and so it'll hang. So the way around that is just set your allowed IPs to be the Wireguard LAN and nothing more, so that in other words, if the traffic comes through the tunnel, send it back through the tunnel, but if it comes through the public, then let it come back from on the public is basically what that's saying. So, so this works for me. I haven't tested all the ramifications of that. I'm just trying to get around a problem where as soon as I bring this up, my SSH totally freezes on me. And then the endpoint, oops, come on down here. This is this side. So remember, it's 192.1.15, and this is the this is what we told it to listen on 51.8.20. So that, yeah. Now this one I added. This is persistent keep alive because UDP is connectionless. It will eventually time out after there's nothing going on. UDP is kind of cool is that it doesn't have keep alive going on all the time. So like the TCP traffic does, but eventually UDP will time this out if there's nothing going on, and it'll close down. It'll shut down the connections. That's fine unless you're running NAT. And if you're running NAT on your outboard system and trying to maintain NAT, the NAT information as to what IP address the stuff is coming back for, well, that will make a mess of your network connections, and your traffic won't make it back, and you'll have all kinds of problems probably with that. So what I'm doing is I'm just sending a keep alive packet to Wireguard to say, hey, stay up every 30 seconds, stay up. That's it. That's all that is. So at this point, I'm ready to do this one. Okay. There we go. So you'll notice that I am sending traffic, but nothing's happening over here. So yeah, it's trying, but nothing. That's because this guy over here doesn't know anything about what's going on. So, so let me get my little cheat sheet here. And what I'm going to tell the server missed pieces of it. So let's see. I need 1.0-24. So what I'm telling it here is I'm setting WG0 the peer. So I'm setting up the peer part of the server side. This is the public key for the client, which should be right there, and on the allowed IP is the same 10.200.1.0/24. Now if I did that right, we'll start to see traffic coming back off the server. So we know we're connected, but can I actually ping at this point? And yes, I can. So we're pinging that, and let's see, can I go through the big test? Yes, I can. So that's basically it. Now, if you'll notice, I just want to point this out so you don't freak out. You'll notice that it didn't put the stuff in this file yet, did it? So that doesn't happen until I down the connection. And there you go. There, it's added it to the end of the file. So I just want to make you aware of that if you see that, that's what's going on. So I'll bring this back up again. And we're good. So I should be able to ping. I may have to bring this down to reset it, so let me do that. There we go. We're back up again. And that's it. That's simple. So, and I guess, I mean, this is nice for a test, right? I mean, all I'm doing is using my servers here to test Wireguard the server with the client. But in actuality, what I would really want to do is to take that server and move it out to the internet, move it to Linode, move it to DigitalOcean or Amazon, Google, wherever. Well, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to move it to Google, would it? But since you're trying to protect yourself from that. But that's basically it. If you have any questions, just leave them down below. I'll try to get through them. I tried a couple of different things to try to make things difficult for me with this to see if I could get it to fail. And I was able to get it to fail. One thing I didn't show you, though, let's go ahead and kill that. So you'll notice that it does tell the date and time when the link came up and when it went down, but it doesn't show any traffic. There's no traffic that's going across here that you can see what's going on. So yeah, you can definitely see that the link came up, the link went down, the link went up, the link came down, and someone could then go and look, what WG0 config is set to do, and then they would know that that was you at those particular times. But don't use this for nefarious purposes. First of all, if you go to host this on Linode or you go to host this on DigitalOcean or Amazon, they will respond to a warrant, a search warrant, and they will provide the data. They will link your account to your Wireguard installation, and they will hang you. This is not what it's for. If you're going to do that, don't do that. But if this is designed to maintain your privacy. I enjoyed this today. If you did, please like and subscribe. Hope to see you all again real soon, and bye for now.